Here we go. Kia ora koutou. Welcome from wherever you are joining us to this live Q&A hosted by myself, Thomas McGrath, consultant at Write, and the wonderful Write Online, which is our collection of microlearning videos that you can access the wonders of plain language and all of the expertise of our consultant team in bite-sized chunks at your learning pleasure. So go to writeonline.co.nz and you can have a trial for 7 days and see if it's for you. Today, the topic is, and I will get to the point, we're going to be talking about the topic of writing, or just communicating really, concisely, and what it means to write and get to the point. We have two wonderful consultants with us today, Corinna Lines and Simon Carter. Thank you both of you for joining us. Simon, where are you joining us from? And tell us a teensy-weensy bit about yourself.
I'm joining from a grey, cold Auckland, West Auckland. My background is that I've been a writing trainer and editor and business writer for about 20 years. Before that, I worked as a graphic designer and creative director for about 20 years. Fantastic.
Lovely. Thank you, Simon. And Corinna, where are you joining us from? And tell us just a teensy-weensy bit about yourself.
Hey, I'm in Hataitai in Wellington. I kind of fell into working with words in London in the 1980s. I got a job as a proofreader, and that was quite a small little world, but it gradually got bigger as I discovered things like editing and the broader principles of clear communication. And these days, proofreading is a little bit of what I do, but I'm much more interested in communicating well and helping other people to do that too.
Fantastic. Okay, lovely. Well, we're going to get into it very shortly, but if you are watching from wherever you are joining us, you can submit your questions to our wonderful team today through the Q&A function at the bottom of the tab here in Zoom. So if you've got something that you would like to ask these two people, then please let us know, pop it in there, and we will get through as many questions as we can in the time that we have. Now, in the spirit of the topic, we're going to get to the point, and I'm going to ask our two consultants for their top 3 tips. What are the 3 things that they would suggest to those of you who are watching? If you want to write concisely, you want to get to the point and keep it brief, what do you need to do? So Simon, I'm going to start with you. Give us some great stuff right off the bat. 3 tips, what would you say?
Okay, the first thing I'd say, this may sound a bit controversial, is that brevity can be a false god. So if we only focus on being short and using very few words, we can make our own lives harder, because sometimes we miss giving readers the detail that they need, and then we get caught in that horrible go-round of doom where we're going backwards and forwards, people are asking questions. So often what we say is that you be as long as you need to be, but make sure you organize the content well. So if some of your readers are going to bug you for detail, make sure you put that later on, maybe in an appendix or even an email. You can say, I've explained the process I used at the end of this email. That'd be my first thought. Then 2 thoughts on trying to write shorter. The first would be use straightforward language, so closer to how you might say things. Usually that will give you shorter sentences and shorter constructions than the sort of fancy written language that we often slip into. And I think my third point would be thricely short. So short sentences, short paragraphs, short words.
Okay, there's a lot in that. That's fantastic. Thank you, Simon. And I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more depth in the time that we have. That's a lot to take in. All right, Corinna, your turn. Top 3 tips. What would you suggest to those people who are watching at home who want to be concise?
Well, I'm going to take a step back from, while I agree with everything Simon said, take a step back to before you start thinking about the words you're using. First thing is to make a plan for anything. Even though you may not think you've got time, a good plan will actually save you time in the long run. Second thing, think about the questions your readers may have. And the third thing is identify your key messages, the most important parts of your communication.
Okay. Fantastic. All right. So there you go, folks. Straight off the bat, 6 wonderful tips for you to be able to write more concisely. Now, let's get in some questions. So again, if you've just joined us, you are welcome to submit your own questions. This is a live Q&A. So down the bottom there in the Q&A function, you can put in the question that you would like either Simon or Corinna to answer. Here's one for you. A lot of people worry about tone when they are writing concisely. They feel that if you're stripping all the detail out of your writing and you're really getting to the point, then people are going to think that you're a harsh, mean baddie. What would you say to someone who has that concern, and what can you do about that? Corinna, what would you say if someone's worried about their tone, if they don't want to write concisely because they're worried about their tone?
Yeah, I actually looked up the word concise before I came on into this webinar, and the definition in the dictionary is saying what's necessary with no unnecessary words. And, you know, this ties in with what Simon was saying, really. If you just give people a whole list of bullet points with minimal words in them, chances are you're going to sound very abrupt, brisk. The trouble is when we're writing, it's also about relationship, and that's where tone comes into it. So tone is about how the reader reacts to what you've written. So we're always thinking about the information we're writing, and then we're using the words around it to soften things. So instead of saying, peer review this and get it back to me today, you would normally have something like, please, could you, would you have time to, do you mind doing this for me? You know, we know all this. My main tip for tone, I would say, is read things aloud. You may feel silly, you know, you may need to go into a room by yourself, but reading things aloud is the best way of getting an idea of how it sounds out loud. It gives you more of an idea of how it might sound in the reader's mind.
So it's really about choosing the right words rather than so if people are worried about cutting lots of things down, it just means they need to take more care with the words that they do include. Is that right? Yeah,
absolutely.
Simon, what sayest thou about tone when keeping it brief?
I think the what I've seen talking to folks about tone, often where people have a concern is in an email like Corinna was describing there, where you're asking somebody to do something, and people can worry it can feel too brusque if you say, please send me the X by 5 o'clock today. But often that's just what you need. So I think something that I've noticed and I found helpful in my career is, I was given a tip years ago, give people a reason why. So still keep it brief and crisp to the point, and please send me the X by 5 o'clock today, but then explain why you need it. I need this data, I need that data so that I can finish the report to give to Bob, so Bob won't yell at me for being late again. So that can be very helpful, I think, is give people a reason why, rather than adding too much fluff around your request. Keep the request crisp, but give people a reason why. I think that'd be my top level thought there.
So when you say about fluff, is that often people, it seems, will front load the why and the fluff? The example you described was you kind of went straight to the point and you said the thing that you needed and then you gave the reason why. What's the wisdom in that?
Well, yeah, because I think you get it in early. So as Corinna was saying, the important stuff, you think what's the important things you need to say. And so I'd always be thinking, what's the thing I want the person to do? And what's my reason why I want them to do it? And get those in, you know, as early as you can, I think.
Yeah, I think it's also about the difference between requests and sounding like you're giving somebody an order. And even Simon just putting please at the front turned it into a request rather than a do this kind of command.
Right, lovely. Okay, let's talk about a specific text form. Let's talk about the report. A lot of professionals out there have to write reports, and sometimes these might be annual reports that have a lot of information and different ideas and opinions and things in there. So let's talk about the report as a form. And one part will start with executive summaries. I mean, the birth of the executive summary was to try and summarize for executives the report, but they're often done quite poorly. So let's talk about what tips would you give to people who need to write executive summaries to make sure that they're really doing their job. Simon, what would you say?
Sorry, this is my pet subject, so I have to be careful not to run away with this
okay.
one.
I will stop you if needed.
But with executive summaries, I think the first thing is that make sure it really is an executive summary, so that it's covering all the key findings and key thoughts. It shouldn't just be an introduction or a background. And then I think the second thought is we've got a great document about this on our website called The Magic of Threes. And is it okay if I share my screen quickly just to show one exhibit, as some folks say? Give me a moment here, caller. So what I want to just flash up on screen is if you go to Wright's website and you go to, can you see my screen there? Does that come up? If you go to Wright's website and you go to I think is it resources or free tools? Is it resources? Yep. And then free tools. This is an example of a model you can think about to get you an outline of a summary. So this may not be the complete summary you use, but the idea is that you think to yourself, what's my main message? What's my main recommendation? And then think about, well, what are my reasons why, or the key facts that go with that? And then you think about how you would expand a little bit of detail underneath those supporting points. And also picking up a point that Corinna made earlier, in your executive summary, make sure you catch some of those likely questions. So this is an example and a model that you can find on Wright's website under the free resources section.
Fantastic. So magic really does exist.
It does. It's everywhere. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Simon. That's a wonderful resource. And again, you can go to our website and have a look there. And I think you've got your own series on Write Online about the magic of threes.
Indeed you do. Yes.
Okay, Corinna, give us your wisdom here, either about executive summaries or just any tips for people who are writing reports. What's something to keep in mind when you want to be concise?
Okay, that my tip about executive summaries is to write them last. So when you've done the whole report and you're really clear in your mind about what the main messages are, things that need to be taken up front, don't think, oh, I'll write that first and then expand it for the rest of it. So it's kind of doing it back to front. And then the other thing is, think of a report as having a skeleton, and that skeleton is its structure, and the structure is based on headings. And if you remember, I talked about making a plan. Well, your plan for a report can simply be a list of your headings. You can use Word's table of contents to extract your headings and see them all in a row. But it's like a route map. It tells you where you're going, sees if you've got things in a logical order for the reader, sees if there's a logical flow to it. And it means that the reader can look at the table of contents and see the journey of the report, where they're starting, where they're going, where they'll end up. And that's also helpful for you as the writer to know where you're going, rather than opening a Word document and typing and perhaps just driving around in circles.
Right, which seems to be a very common problem.
Let's possibly comment.
Let's talk about longer reports. A common question we get is whether, say an annual report that's written by a team of people with several quite chunky sections, there's a bit of repetition there. Are there any tips that you can give to people who are having to write longer reports? Is repetition okay? And also, is there room for putting lots of things in the appendix to make it seem like the report is shorter? Either final thoughts on reports and report writing and keeping it brief there, Corinna?
I think there's good repetition and there's unhelpful repetition. So in your executive summary, you will want to be restating stuff, probably not in exactly the same words, but you're restating main messages, recommendations, calls to action, that sort of thing. I would say if you have lots of people contributing to a report, that you need to have one person who is responsible for going through the whole thing and making sure the same stuff isn't coming up. There will always be, themes and terms and things that do come up, but to make sure that you're not repeating yourself in sections, that you try not to irritate the reader. You don't want the reader to be thinking, I've already read about that. You sometimes get that, say, in annual reports, you might have a chairman's foreword and then the CEO's forward, and there's very similar themes going on. So yeah, good repetition, unhelpful repetition. I would say take out really detailed stuff and put it into an appendix. Just clearly tell the reader where it is. It's also never been easier to send readers to read more detail. You can give them links, you can give them downloads, you can send them to an appendix. You can put cross references, so it's really easy for them to know where they're going and to get back again. So yeah, think about whether the repetition is helping to reinforce the messages or whether it's annoying and needs to be weeded out.
Okay, any final thoughts, Simon, on report writing?
Not really, other than I think I'd reinforce that point Corinna made about having someone who's got the right to edit the whole document. Sometimes people use the phrase that one person's going to hold the pen, so other people get to contribute, but one person has the, gets to hold the red pen. And I think that agreeing that up front can save a lot of pain as deadlines approach, and it helps to get a better finished product.
Yeah, and also we do sometimes get documents with a whole team of people working on them, and they're having an entire discussion in comments, but they haven't actually made a decision.
Right.
Indeed, yeah. So I think hold the pen is a really good thought. Yeah, I'd go with that, definitely.
Okay. Well, while we're on that subject, I mean, it can be tricky to write collaboratively. Corinna, I want to pick up your point and talk a little bit more about planning and preparation. So can you give us some tips about, so if people want to write concisely, you mentioned that planning is important. What can people do in that planning stage? So what specifically do you mean? And are there any things to do with collaborative writing that can help in that? Is it the same stuff?
I think it's quite different individually. It depends what you're writing as well. The difference between a short email and a long report. Emails, it's generally just you writing it. A long report, you may well have a whole team working on it. I would say the planning process, quite often a good way to start is mind mapping. And I'm not talking about short emails here, but when you've actually got to decide on that journey of where you're going. For the mind map, I am a great fan of the humble post-it note.
Yeah.
Literally a big piece of paper, post-it notes, write your topics, your headings, the things you need to cover, and then you can group them, rearrange them, sort them. So you can do that on your own. You can also do that with a team on an even bigger piece of paper. There are also electronic mind mapping tools. The difference I would say there is that apparently you use a different part of your brain with pen and paper to when you're typing. And so if you're at the thinking stage, quite often you're better you're doing the pen and paper on a finite little post-it note, whereas on screen you can type as much as you want, and the risk is that you start drafting the report rather than doing a mind map. But just that whole idea of getting an idea of where you're going, planning your route, as we used to do before we had robots telling us where to go, and the headings are your signposts along the way. Those are the main things. And even with an email, I would be thinking, what's a really good subject line to cue the reader about what this email is about, and hopefully to get them to open it. And then what's my main message? Do I want them to do something? Is there a deadline? Is it urgent? Those sorts of things. So the thing you want to achieve.
Lovely. Simon, any thoughts on planning and preparation that will help folks to write more concisely?
I think I'd agree with everything Corinna said. I think the only thing I would think about is that sometimes you can, if you start to think about your key messages and reasons why, using that idea that I showed on screen a few minutes earlier, that can actually help you to get a picture of what you need to do at the start. So sometimes, that mind mapping and planning that Corinna's talking about, you can actually have an executive summary in mind, and that should give you the key points you've got to kind of hit as you go through your report. So sometimes you can get a really nice double benefit where planning your argument and your the points you need to cover is going to give you both your executive summary and the structure of a longer document.
Yeah, I think that the two questions we emphasize for any sort of writing is, what is your purpose? So why are you writing? And what do you want to achieve? And those two questions, asking those at the start of anything that you write, will just help you target your writing so that you're not just sort of waltzing around the topic and then putting the most important thing right at the very end, where they may never actually get to read it.
They may never get there. Okay, let's talk about something that seems a little bit on the edge of writing concisely, but it has an effect, is formatting. So I think it's worth discussing, because there are a range of formatting tricks that people might use. Like sometimes we'll see people writing a lot of bullet points as a way of wanting to be concise or appear concise. what are some tips that either of you can give about formatting? Maybe they're things that you should do, things that you shouldn't do. Simon, we'll start with you.
I think my first thought would be that less is more when it comes to formatting. So try not to have too much kind of what we would call noise, really. So lots of colours and sizes and so forth. I think inserting a bit of white space between paragraphs and sections. And then a plea from my heart to everyone who's listening is when you put a bold heading in, which we heartily encourage, make sure there's more space above it than below it. Because very often you see that bold heading floating like a lonely cloud between two paragraphs. And it's just kind of a bit distracting for the eye, and it loses its sort of oomph. So make sure you have more space above than below your bold headings. 20 years of design experience there, boiled down to a single point. Okay, and what about
Corinna, any formatting tips or things to consider, do's or don'ts for people?
Yeah, the types of documents that I enjoy the least are ones where all the headings have been manually formatted, lovingly, individually. When Word has all these heading styles that you can modify and make them look how you want. Using the heading styles means you can automatically extract a table of contents. It means you can modify heading 1 and all the heading ones will change. So say if you haven't got enough space above your heading, you modify the heading style and magic, they all shift. You know, if you format the heading to stay with the text that comes after it, then you will never have a heading left at the bottom of the page by itself. But I do get quite a few documents that come through with no table of contents, and then you look at all the headings, they say they're normal. How can that be normal? All being manually formatted. Honestly, Word has I mean, we all get cross with Word, but it has so many things it can do to make your life easier. I really encourage you to experiment with Word styles and use them.
Because a better control of the tool like Word means that it can do things quicker for you, which means you have more time to plan, right?
Yeah.
Writing more concise.
Yeah.
Okay. Simon, you talked at the start, one of your tips was about the something in threes, right? Short documents, short paragraphs, short sentences. Let's talk about the paragraphs and sentences. What can people do at that level to write concisely? What are your main tips there?
Well, I have when I run training workshops, I have 4 tips that I talk to people about you know, when we're working at that sort of sentence level. So the first tip is to try and use everyday straightforward language. So Corinna talked earlier about how reading things out loud will help you judge the tone of what you've written. Also, if you read it out loud and you realize that there are lots of words in there that you would never normally say, our advice would be, you know, replace them with more ordinary words. Sometimes I use the phrase costume drama language. You know, if you read something out loud and it sounds like you should be in a costume drama, then, you know, maybe kind of turn it back a bit, dial it back, use more everyday language. The second tip is one idea per sentence. That's often one of the sort of 2 things that will tend to make a sentence longer than it needs to be is there's more than one idea. So one idea per sentence, the full stop is your friend. And the second thing that I'll always look for in sentences is there a trapped list inside the sentence? Is there a list in the sentence you could break out into bullet points? Because if you do that, you get a double win. You kind of have an easier to read sentence and you've helped the reader because you've shown them the list. Then I think the 4th tip that I'd have is to cut out what we would call spare words. So words that aren't doing any work. I have a colleague who talks about garnish. So, you know, imagine each sentence you write is a dish that you're presenting to a loved one. You don't want there to be too much garnish getting in the way of the good nutrition. So, and garnish makes people anxious. Do you eat it? Has it been washed properly? You know.
Yeah, and you don't want to choke on a piece of pasta.
Yeah.
I haven't heard the garnish example. That's a good one. And I guess Why is it that people want to put lots of garnish in? Is it that they want to come across more professional? Do they want to be taken more seriously? Well, if someone is hesitant to take out the garnish, what would you say to them, Simon?
I'd say well, two thoughts though. The first thing, the first question you asked was, why do people do it? Corinna, I'd be really interested to know what you think about this, but I think it's because people feel it's expected of them. And they've kind of been taught it from when they were little kids, that writing has to be different from talking. So I think that's why we do it. Mm-hmm. And what I say to people in workshops is that I make them a personal promise that never in their career will anybody call them up and say, that thing you sent me, it got to the point too quickly and I could just follow it really easily. Would you mind rewriting it just to make it a bit longer and to make your points a bit harder to see? Ain't going to happen. So there are no prizes for extra words. It's not Scrabble. It's not,
Okay, Corinna, your thoughts. So anything to do with what Simon's just mentioned, anything about writing concisely on a paragraph or a sentence level?
Yeah, I want to talk about sentences, and I completely agree with Simon's thing where we could get more formal because we think we're writing, but I also want to put in a plea for not doing your thinking on the page. So I have some examples here of sentences where if you were saying them, it would be okay. You would have your intonation, your tone. You would be able to pause if they didn't understand because you'd be able to tell by looking at them. When you're writing, you don't have that luxury. So this is just a wee example of sentences where the person is thinking aloud. So the main task I see on Wednesday is I would like to facilitate a discussion on goals for the mission action plan. The sentence is there, but it's got a whole lot of fluff in front of it. And we are looking at how do we together hold the vision and drive the action plan forward. If you're saying that in conversation, it's okay because we modify how we talk according to the response we're getting from the person we're talking to. But, therefore at the next meeting, I would love us to start looking at what are some goals we feel together we can hit this year. And I'm at the point of saying, I don't want to do any of this because you've made me work so hard. And it's not that the intent isn't good. It's not that the points aren't good. It's all the fluff at the start where readers can start to think, you're wasting my time. And I just want to put in a plea that, we may think of writing and reading as a partnership, but we are very big on saying the writer should be doing more work so that the reader has to do less work. And so we're constantly thinking, is this helpful for the reader? Have I just put all my thinking out of here and all they actually needed was the last 5 words? That's what I would be thinking.
Lovely. Okay, well, in the spirit of getting to the point, we are just about out of the time. Are there any final words that either of you would like to say to people as parting advice or encouragement, motivation to those who are wanting to write nice and concisely and clearly? Simon, any final words?
Yeah, remember the words of the great Berry Gordy of Motown Records. Don't bore us, get to the chorus. So get your key points in early.
That's classic. Corinna, any final words?
I don't have song lyrics, I'm sorry. I would just be saying there's what you think is important as the writer and there's what the reader thinks is important. And I really encourage people to think about what's important to the reader and write for them.
Lovely. Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you everybody for joining us from wherever you are. Thank you, Corinna. Thank you, Simon, very much for your time and your wonderful advice. So just a reminder, this webinar was hosted by Write Online, which is a micro-learning library of videos made by expert consultants like these two people. Go to writeonline.co.nz and you can try it out and see if it's for you. Until next time, see you later and have a good one.